Hello there everyone, and welcome to Voidor Studios for our 40k episode. This time we shall be looking at the literal workhorse of the Imperial Guard army. The tank that, quite frankly, every budding commander wants to make sure they have in their army. The Leman Russ, named after a rather stubborn and dependable Primarch, Leman Russ. Partly for the fact that this is one of the hardest working tanks in the Imperium, partly because of its stubbornness and ferocity, and also because I presume it amused Leman Russ at the time to have a tank named after him. This particular tank was developed at some point during the age of technology, well before the Imperium of Man was even a thing. It was rediscovered by the Space Wolves on a hive world known as Nova Barilla, and as this vehicle was discovered by the Space Wolves and their Primarch, Mechanicum chose to honour the Space Wolves for handing over this STC by naming the newly discovered tank after him. The Leman Russ battle tank, as it's more commonly known, is the Imperial Guard's primary form of armoured attack and defence. It can be armed and armoured in multiple different ways, it is very adaptable, it is very tough, and it's perfect for the wars in the 41st millennium. This is not a sophisticated vehicle. In fact, one of the jokes about it being called the Leman Russ is because of its lack of sophistication, but it more than makes up for this in the fact that it's reliable and versatile. So long as you have some kind of combustible liquid, this tank will run on it without any problems whatsoever. Very heavily armoured on the front, it is perfect for grinding forward and bombarding the enemy with its fantastic cannons. It won't get there very quickly, but it will get there and continue firing its guns as it continues rolling forwards. This is a tank that really benefits most by having infantry protecting its flanks, because its side armour, whilst pretty damn decent, is weaker than the front, and of course the rear is weakest point. But hopefully if you're an Imperial Guard army, you should have plenty of reasons to not have someone sneak around behind you, because you'll be surrounding your tanks with infantry that will reduce the chances of them getting blown out from the rear. It is crewed by a minimum of 4 crew, including a commander, gunner, loader, and driver. The additional upgrades of having side sponson weapons also means that you have additional crewmen to operate both of these guns. This is a tank that will not be making any stealth runs. It is very loud, very noisy, and it is definitely never ever going to sneak up on someone, regardless if they're deaf, blind and dumb. It's been a reliable weapon throughout all of the wars that the Imperium has been through, right up until the 41st millennium. Its standard armament is known as a battle cannon, a 120mm smooth bore cannon with high explosive armour-piercing shells, capable of smashing through almost anything that the enemies can throw at the Imperium, and making a nice large blast in the process. This means that this gun is fantastic against most vehicles and will decimate light infantry, and most heavy infantry are going to have a really horrible time when it starts shooting at them. In addition to this, it often has a hull-mounted heavy bolter on the front. However, as you have 2 side sponson weapons, these can be additional heavy bolters or heavy flamers, or you can have melters or plasma cannons. And the Leman Russ tank can be upgraded with an astonishing amount of stuff. Camouflage netting, especially if you're in jungle or desert environments, is very useful, making sure that so long as the Leman Russ tank is staying still and you've turned the engine off, then it's got a decent enough chance of hiding. Extra armor plating, hunter-killer missiles for that little extra killing power, improved Vox communication equipment, minesweeper devices, heavy stubber mounts, storm bolters, searchlights, track guards, dozer blades, and smoke launchers. Often these Leman Russ tanks travel in packs, usually 3, with a single tank being the formation leader. And these tanks can be in multiple different variations. The standard version is known as the battle tank. This is the one with the battle cannon and a heavy bolter mounted on the front. Standard armament. A variation almost as common as the battle cannon variant is known as the Leman Russ Demolisher. Equipped with a Demolisher cannon, a fantastic short-range bombardment and line breaker tank, this Demolisher gun packs a firepower so vast and heavy it makes me drool, because this thing is capable of smashing through anything at short ranges, and it's fantastic at siege warfare, it's fantastic to just bash through tanks. Even Titans have to be a little worried when Demolisher cannons turn up. I've had a very satisfying experience where Demolisher Cannons, a group of 3 Demolisher tanks, just completely wrecked an Imperial Knight in a single turn. These are very, very dangerous tanks in short distances, and with the added addition of plasma cannons or multi-melters and a las cannon on the front, you want to stay as far away from that main gun as possible, but, make sure you stick that las cannon on the front mount, and it won't matter how far away they get from you, you'll still be tagging them. A rarer and more advanced variation on the battle tank is known as the Vanquisher, armed with a lovely gun known as a Vanquisher cannon. This is a dedicated anti-tank shell. The gun barrel is almost twice as long as the tank, so don't expect to be moving particularly quickly or rotating this gun fast. This is a tank that likes to sit still and snipe, for want of a better word. Although, of course, if you're just rumbling forward in a straight line, then it'll still manage just fine. It will shoot far further than any battle tank cannon, and it has more than enough power to even stomp through Chaos Titans, Greenskin Stompers, and really anything that comes up against it. In fact, personal moment here, I once had a very satisfying moment where my Vanquisher cannon managed to shoot a Storm Raven out of the sky with a single shot. This was back in the previous edition, so trying to hit flying objects with a Vanquisher cannon was virtually impossible, but when it hit, it basically destroyed it. One of the many fun moments I had with my Mordian Iron Guard. You then have the Eradicator, armed with what is known as an Eradicator Nova Cannon, a wonderful variant which is fantastic for killing most infantry. It fires a high caliber ballistic shell that is capable of exploding and destroying any barricades or shelters that you might be hiding in, and at the same time detonating a subatomic charge. An extremely effective tank in cities, jungles, any dense terrain, and because of the large blast that it's able to create with this weapon, it means that any infantry that try to hide are going to have a really rough day indeed. And finally, if you really want to make sure that any infantry don't ever live ever again, and you like big guns with lots of barrels, then perhaps the Punisher is the variant you'll enjoy the most. Armed with the signature Punisher Gatling cannon, a large multi-barreled ballistic weapon, it is one of the fastest firing tanks that I've ever seen, and more than capable of knocking down heavy infantry as well as anything with any kind of light armor. It's not a tank you ever want to take on a tank-on-tank fight, but with the addition of plasma cannons or las cannons, you can make sure that it has a chance of surviving a tank assault. But as with all Leman Russes, you can kind of mix and match the side sponsors as you see fit. As I said before, you could take flamethrowers, so if you have a tank with a short-range gun and you want to get up close to infantry units and buildings, then perhaps take an Eradicator and a couple flamethrowers attached to it, just for good measure. Or you take the Vanquisher and give yourself some plasma cannons and multi-melters with a las cannon sponsor on the front, and really, out of those options, you have plenty of things that are going to deal with most infantry, heavy infantry, and medium-sized tanks, whilst the Vanquisher cannon deals with anything bigger. The variations are potentially endless, and that is one of the reasons the Imperial Guard love this thing so much. It is such an adaptable vehicle. And another Leman Russ variant, which is quite close to my heart, although a little bit of a suicidal venture if ever there was one, is known as the Leman Russ Executioner, armed with a plasma destroyer, a slightly more powerful but very much more dangerous version of a plasma cannon. It's a temperamental beast at the best of times, and the tank crews themselves also feel that the Executioner more than any other has a bit of a grumpy tendency. This tank is fitted with various forms of emergency vents, heat shielding, and coolants to help the plasma cannon be less likely to blow up. Because, well, when that gun blows up, you can be pretty confident that it's going to probably take the crew with it, so keeping all of its systems running smoothly and cool is downright essential. The crews that are willing to command these tanks are typically viewed upon as being, insane. I think insane is a fair enough point, because these plasma cannons are very, very temperamental pieces of Imperium technology. And speaking from personal experience, having had a squad of 3 of these, with las cannons and additional plasma cannons on the side, you're just sticking your middle finger up at a thunderstorm whilst wearing copper armor and screaming at the top of your lungs that gods don't exist. That's the kind of luck you're playing with when you have that much plasma in one location. I once had a very unsatisfying experience where an entire squad of these all blew up because every single plasma rolled a 1. That was downright painful, and a slightly rarer, but not necessarily uncommon variation is known as the Leman Russ Annihilator. Replacing the battle cannon with a twin-link las cannon, similar to the Space Marine Predator tank, this is typically a tank that is associated most often with the Death Corps of Krieg, particularly as they like this variant for its anti-tank capabilities and the fact it makes an excellent defensive tool. Las cannons have some of the best ranges out of all the Imperium's weapons for this variant of tank, and the Death Corps do love something that can fire over a ridiculously long distance. Typically, it doesn't have any other hull-mounted weapons because it requires the extra power cells to, well, power the main gun. This is a true tank hunter, plain and simple. And last, but by no means least, an even more infrequent variant of the Leman Russ, the Leman Russ Exterminator, armed with a twin-linked autocannon. A very decent gun, but a bit of a light one when equipped on a Leman Russ. An autocannon is fantastic for killing infantry and light to maybe medium heavy armor. The Imperium have found this tank particularly useful when fighting against hordes of things like orcs and tyranids, where you can equip heavy bolters or flamers onto the side of this and make it particularly fun whenever these small units try to get close, as they are burnt, singed, shot and, well, destroyed. Definitely a variant you want to avoid going near anything with heavy armor, although of course if you want it to have a tiny bit of anti-tank potential, stick a las cannon on its front sponson and then you've got your adaptability thrown in again. And really, I can't emphasize this enough, this is what makes the Leman Russ tank so goddamn amazing. Once you've got your infantry platoons all lined up and all ready to defend their flanks, you can just ask these things to continue rolling forward, firing their guns relatively accurately, and not giving a damn about what is hitting them in the front. Now obviously, if they're being shot at by anti-tank weapons as well, then Leman Russes are going to struggle, but they are one of the most common and heavily armoured vehicles. When your front armour is a nice solid 150mm thick, you can withstand a fair amount of firepower. So just make sure your Imperial Guard tanks are surrounded with infantry to cover them from being attacked from behind. Remember people, Imperial Guard, combined arms. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this. Have a lovely weekend wherever you are. Until next time, take care everyone.